Hey there lovelies, it's me, Bitter Corella, and I'm once again here in the dark backward of the video crypt to talk about some dark tomes from some dark writers. As usual, to find out which dark tomes we'll be speaking of tonight, I shall consult the Orb. Clive Barker.
Are you ready for the sex girls? The hot, lean, hot, big hot girls.
Hey kids, it's the 80s! And you know what that means? It's a whole new grit in horror, so get lost gothic, kiss it kaiju, eat it. Some third form of horror, because the new hotness in town is splatterpunk. Yes, splatterpunk. It's gorier, grodier, and grosser than anything that's come before. And there's a whole new generation of hip, young, enfants terribles that are taking the horror world by storm. And the man at the vanguard of that revolution is a hip young buck named Clive Barker. Now, you're probably familiar with some of Clive Barker's iconic monsters, like the Cenobites of Hellraiser and Candyman of Candyman. But there's a lot more to Barker than just some cool monsters. For one thing, Barker is the one who really took horror into the 20th century for a new, modern audience. Stephen King, who was already the big name in horror around the time that Barker got started, liked to set his stories in idyllic small towns to really explore the rot beneath the surface of the American dream and to probe the lies of childhood nostalgia. But Barker took horror into a gritty urban milieu. To Barker, the city itself is a vampire that slowly sucks you dry and robs you of your humanity. The cramped, sweltering, unnatural confines and suffocating isolation of city life can only repress the human urge to fuck, shit, and kill so much before it explodes out into an orgy of sex and violence. And oh yeah, the other thing about Clive Barker's writing, of course, it is extremely horny.
Are you ready for the sex girls? The hot, lean, hot, big hot girls. Are you ready for the sex girls? The right, ultra vital, nice girls.
Sex is an integral feature of the Barker landscape and the sucking vortex at the center of every Clive Barker story, drawing everyone into its sticky, sweaty orbit. Now, sex is a tantric gateway to the worlds beyond, and it happens again and again in Barker stories, from Jacqueline S., Her Will and Testament, to The Age of Desire, to The Hellbound Heart, that succumbing to your basest carnal desires is ironically a way to transcend this world and become something more than mere flesh. Let's look now at some common features of the Clive Barker story. Barker's universe is one of secret histories. You may feel like you know your own past. You may feel like you know where you come from. You may feel like you know who you are. But time and again, Barker's stories reveal that this is all just a charade, something intended to shield us from the awful truth of the actual past. In The Skins of the Fathers, it's revealed that you may think men and women came into this world together, but in fact, women came first. And in the eons before men were invented, they copulated with demons. In The Midnight Meat Train, it's revealed that the founders of New York chose the city's location to pay homage to a race of underground cannibal gods. In Rawhead Rex, a pagan monster god was originally defeated by the rise of Christianity, which then proceeded to scrub him from the record, which ironically left it completely unprepared for Rex's return. Speaking of religion, fairly typical Christian devils and demons do appear with some regularity throughout Barker's work, and they do things that you would expect fairly typical Christian devils and demons to do. They write unconscionable contracts written in blood, they tempt people, they make wagers for the souls of the wicked, things that you'd expect. The main difference between Barker and some other horror writers is that these demons operate mostly unopposed. If God exists in the Barker universe, he is content to take a hands-off approach and just let things sort out for themselves. Very important, let's not lump some of Barker's most original creations in with those devils and demons. I'm of course talking about the Cenobites from the story The Hellbound Heart and later the Hellraiser film series. Now, there have been about a bazillion Hellraiser sequels, and they've gradually flanderized the Cenobites into just kinky demons, but Barker's original concept of these pan-dimensional hedonists whose notions of pleasure and pain have been so intertwined that they cannot be understood by any sort of human morality is a bit more horny than just sex demons.
Are you ready for the sex girls? The hot, hot, lean, hot, big, hot girls.
Urban settings. Clive Barker generally likes to set his stories in a modern, contemporary city environment. It's a place that's very now, very of the time, but also instantly decrepit and reminiscent of faded glories. A world of derelict warehouses, abandoned factories, flophouse hotels, old tenements and row houses. It's a place that really reflects the squalor and filth of modern life. Now, during the 80s, there was, of course, rising concerns, or we might even say paranoia, about high crime, youth gone wild, serial killers, urban gangs. And that fed into a conviction that city life was unnatural and that a subconscious need for the greenery and space of the countryside would slowly drive city dwellers to violence. That's part of why the 80s had so many hyper-violent vigilante flicks, all about a cop on the edge who'd been pushed too far and finally had to take the law into his own hands to fight against all the scum that was taking advantage of this system that just would not budge to stop them. And you see a lot of those same themes dealt in Clive Barker's work with a little more nuance than your typical reactionary 80s action flick. Quite a bit more nuance, actually. Sex and violence, like I mentioned. Now, just like the Cenobites, for whom pleasure and pain are completely merged, in Clive Barker's imagination, sex and violence are intrinsically linked. It's not that they are necessarily one, but Barker is very cognizant of the raw emotions involved that can easily lead one act to bleed into the other. His descriptions of sex very often mirror his descriptions of violence, and vice versa. So a lover's penis might penetrate a vagina just as a knife might penetrate a victim's flesh. And a murderer's knife might penetrate a victim's flesh just as a penis might penetrate its lover's vagina. The lover of the penis owner. Not that the penis itself would have a lover, I guess. Queer subtext. There is actually a lot of queer subtext in Barker's work. Just as one example, in Hellraiser, the film based on The Hellbound Heart by Barker, and also directed by Barker as a film, Frank Cotton assumes that the ultimate sexual pleasure promised to him by the lament configuration will of course be beautiful women. And he is quite surprised when it actually turns out to be the masculine sadomasochistic nightmare Pinhead. So that's a pretty obvious subversion of hetero filmgoers' expectations in that film. I don't want to suggest that queerness is always inherently sexual, but Barker's vision of it certainly is. And that does make sense to some degree. Barker himself knew that he was gay at 18 and spent much of his youth in the 70s as a hustler and S&M club goer. So it kind of seems to fit that he would see queerness and sex as very closely aligned. In Barker's work, queerness is synonymous with otherness, with being outside the normal confines of society, with being denied the safety, security, and comfort of normalness, of essentially being a monster. And you can really see when reading Clive Barker's work, he's got a lot of sympathy for the monstrous misfits and freaks of society. The queer subtext, for example, in Barker's Nightbreed is pretty unmistakable. That's probably his most on-the-nose tackling of this subject. It's all about a tribe of misfit monsters who are forced to protect their own against the normal society that hates and persecutes them. And in The Skins of the Fathers, we see normal society organizing to hunt and kill a group of demons whose only desire is to adopt and raise the demon-sired child as one of their own.
Are you ready for the sex girls? The hot, hot, lean, hot, big, hot girls. Are you ready for...
So that's Clive Barker. He's kind of a wild man with a lot of crazy ideas that really shook up the horror genre. His characters are sometimes not as well developed as those you would find in a Stephen King or Dean Koontz book, but they're a lot more varied. There's a lot more voice that you can see in them. And definitely nobody writes with as much gusto as Clive Barker. That's one of the reasons why he's one of my favorites, at least. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our little look at the work of Clive Barker. If you've enjoyed this video, why not like and subscribe, assuming that you're watching it on YouTube. And if you're not watching it on YouTube, which means you're probably watching it on local public access TV, you can't do either of those things, but you can visit our Twitter page, midnight_pals. Check it out, it's lots of fun. And I would know because I write it. You can also check out our book available for purchase where we talk more about horror writers. Until next time, enjoy your mortal coils.
Ghostbusters.